Good morning and welcome to another Monday morning We Are Sunderland briefing. It is Monday the 11th of March, nearly 48 hours removed from Sunderland's trip to Southampton. 4-2 defeat and a sixth defeat in a row. I'm Joe Ramage and I'm joined by Dom Shaw. Dom, how are you doing, mate? Good to see you.
I'm all right, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, pottering on.
Who was Saturday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Got to go straight into it, really, don't we? You've had a couple of days and many miles to ponder what you saw on Saturday. You were down there at St Mary's. I guess initially just summarise what you saw and your thoughts on the game.
I thought the first half was Sunderland were fortunate to only be 2 goals behind, where the Southampton should have had 4 or 5 goals. And at that stage at half time, I thought a repeat of the 5-0 result from earlier in the season looked a real possibility. And even for the first 10, 15 minutes of the second half, then from nowhere, Sunderland obviously get the 2 goals. But then I don't know what's more infuriating from Sunderland's perspective, that the dreadful first half, or the manner in which they then put their comeback to waste in 5-10 minutes. Now, I'm not disputing that Southampton team squad is packed with talent, and when you're bringing players like Joe Rothwell off the bench, that shows the strength and depth. But I just thought it was naive from Sunderland to work their way into a game that they had no right to be leveling, and then just to make it so easy for Southampton to go and win it. I thought there was an awful lot to be alarmed about. Really,
yeah. What you're saying there for me just kind of sums it up in terms of it looked aside that is kind of where it's at the moment. That's becoming more and more bereft of confidence. That is increasingly lacking experience, and that naivety is showing through. I.e., what you're saying there in that second half, because they got back level when they shouldn't have got back level, really. And then it was as though they just went gung ho, and like it was a basketball game, isn't it? You hear that terminology used quite a lot, but it turned into that when at that point probably you needed that control and that experience, that calm head. And they're not really getting that guidance at the moment, are they? And it's looking increasingly more like a side that is lacking the quality in key areas. You know, we've spoke about the recruitment and things like that so often on this show, but it's all just coming to fruition at the moment, isn't it? And every part of it is hitting this squad, and it's such a young squad as well, as we hear and see every week, and it feels like it's really starting to take its toll right now. I mean, 6 defeats on the spin for the first time in the league since the beginning of the 2013-14 season in the Premier League under Paulo Di Canio. It's, I wrote a piece yesterday, sort of uncharted territory, and it certainly is for this squad, and it certainly is at this level to lose that many games in a row. It's really bad at the moment, isn't it?
It is. It was interesting. I asked Russell Martin afterwards how different is this Sunderland side to the team that beat you 5-0 at the start of the season, and what have you made of the season they've had? And he said that, really talented. He really likes what they do as a team. Lots of good individual players. Clearly mentioned that Jack Clarke is a huge miss, as he would be for any team, and talked about how he gets them up the pitch. But he said that the managerial, they've paid the price, were his words, for the managerial changes because they've lost momentum. I think that's an understatement. Clearly, the managerial decisions have backfired. The decision to sack Tony Mowbray backfired. The decision to appoint Michael Beale backfired. And I don't think Sunderland have just lost momentum. They've lost the feel-good factor that there was around the club this time last year. And even at the start of this season, when there was the uncertainty over Mowbray, really on the back of what had happened last season, and you kind of got the impression that all wasn't that too well behind the scenes. But the 5-0 win over Southampton made you realise just what this team is capable of, and offered hope and optimism and promise really for the season ahead. Had you said at that stage that at this stage of the season, Sunderland would be where they are, had lost 6 games on the bounce, and the centre forwards would have scored 3 goals between them, there's got to be a lot of soul searching, hasn't there? And I think the reality now is the season can't end soon enough. Sunderland aren't going to get in the top 6. It would take another 6 defeats on the bounce for them realistically, or certainly another 4 or 5 for them to get sucked in. They shouldn't get sucked in below. But it does feel like the season can't end soon enough now. And then a hugely important summer's ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to that first game between the two teams, the 5-0, it's almost like you can't believe that it's the same season, can you? Really? I mean, for both teams, because because for Southampton, they came up to the stadium and I think Russell Martin was under real pressure at that point. He was probably, I think there was quite a lot of Southampton fans who wouldn't have been sorry to sort of see him go after that result. And it felt at that time for Sunderland as well that they were just getting the mojo back a little bit. It was the start of a decent, the best run of the season. I think they won 5 or 6 games at that point. And to think that it's got to where it's at now. I mean, I know we talk a lot about stats on here, and some fans don't like it, and that's fair enough. But the XG metric obviously is something that we always go to. They gave up the highest XG this season on Saturday, 3.11, I think it was. It's just, they don't even look like the same side from if you're using that game as a barometer, do they? And to think that it's got from here, and it's over that course of the 3 months really since Tony Mowbray's gone.
And I do feel for Mike Dodds, because he talked afterwards. I mean, I couldn't agree with him when he said that for large parts he thought Sunderland matched or were even better than Southampton. I just did not see that at all. But he talked about the two factors that reassure him, and it's the quality of the opposition they've played over the course of the last 3 games, and the injuries, or more the point, the injury. It's that Jack Clarke absence, isn't it? But in all likelihood, Sunderland are probably going to have to do without Jack Clarke next season, because it feels increasingly likely that this summer's going to be the summer that he leaves, and this last few weeks has done nothing to ease concerns about how Sunderland are going to cope without him. But I do feel for Dodds in that sense, in that he has been dealt a tough hand. That said, I thought his selection backfired on Saturday. I don't just want to, after such a bad team display, I don't just want to pick on one, but I mean, what's Mason Burstow done to suggest he should have been in the starting 11 on Saturday? I thought he was. I mean, his finish early on when he stole the ball off, I think it was Bednarek in the first minute or two, and opened his body up, caught between 2 minds, crossed the shot. I thought that was just indicative of a player lacking confidence.
Because he'd done the initial hard part by actually creating the chances and stealing the ball away. Yeah, and it's becoming increasingly, trying to think what the word that I'm using, but you can see why fans are frustrated with it, because there's no cohesion to it, is it? And you can almost suggest that there's not. The coaching staff don't necessarily know which forward to pick week by week, because it changes that often. We've got Hamia getting 2 games in a row, Burstow for the first time under Mike Dodds then gets a look in, Rooson coming off the bench. There's just no settled team. There's no settled direct output through the middle, is there? And I mean, that can't help behind the forward line, because they look and there's no continuity whatsoever. And I mean, the average age of the squad as well, I had a quick look at this before we started, was 20 and a half, or less than 20 and a half years old. To get put in a situation like that, it's really tough, isn't it? Because you haven't got that leader to then just kind of know what to do and manage you through certain points in games. It's just not there for them.
No, I thought Ballard was a miss when the 2 goals conceded after Ballard had gone off. I thought Dan Neil was probably the only Sunderland player to emerge with real credit, but I thought Ballard did what he could in the middle of a back line that struggled throughout. I felt for Chris Rigg, because it just looked a bit too much for him against a quality team. I mean, Will Smallbone, Stuart Armstrong were just class in the Southampton midfield, weren't they? But I mean, on Burstow, and I don't know whether this is oversimplistic, but I just think now that the season, you're not going up. Burstow's not going to be here next season. Why not give Rooson a run of games now? Rooson's going to, I mean, a centre forward has to be signed in the summer, doesn't it? The reality, the likelihood is Rooson isn't going to be the first choice number 9 next season. But Rooson and Hamia, Rooson more so, are surely worth investing in at this stage, because Burstow showed very little to suggest he's going to be a success at this stage. And Al-Shish is the other one. I thought it was pretty baffling that he didn't start. He has to start against QPR, doesn't he? I know there's always a player whose stock rises when he's not playing, and I think Al-Shish is probably that player at the minute. But he was at least positive when he came on, wasn't he? I thought Rooson made a difference with his energy as well. I think both of them will be in against QPR, and I said to Dodds afterwards, that feels like a big game, doesn't it? Going into international break after 6 defeats in a row, a team who were struggling, although they've been on a decent run of form. Admittedly, they got beat at the weekend, but I don't know. I mean, if Sunderland go 1-0 down in that game,
yeah, you've seen the stadium alight in situations like that before. You know, it's clear that the fan base are conflicted at the moment, aren't they? But I agree that when those two came on and that sort of 10-minute period where they got the 2 goals out of nothing, really, that was their only real moments in the game. And I mean, I mentioned the XG earlier. I think that was the highest period of XG in the game. They only got 0.48, I think it was, and that amassed for about 0.2 of it, so almost half of it. The problem is, though, that 10-minute spell shouldn't mask, like what we're saying, was a really abject and another alarming performance away from home. This away form just shows absolutely no signs of stopping at the minute, does it?
No, and Cardiff has the look of a tricky away game next.
Yeah.
They've won 3 on the bounce now. They obviously came from behind to beat Ipswich at the weekend.
But you look at some of them away games as well. You've still got to go to West Brom. You've still got to go to Leeds. You know, so I think they're the next 3 away games, in fact. So it doesn't necessarily get easier if this form doesn't stop, and that's just across the board as well, not just your away form.
And the booing at half time on Saturday from the away end was you know, you couldn't ignore it. It was loud, and I thought it was telling, and I thought it was completely understandable because, Christ, that is a long trip, and it was a packed away end, an incredible following. And I know it's the kind of go-to thing to say, but the fans did deserve a better performance than what they saw in the first half and in the second half, to be honest, because, as I say, other than that 10-15 minute spell, there was nothing. And I think that, you know, even if Sunderland aren't going to finish in the top 6, but it feels like it's important that they carry some momentum, some positivity into the summer, isn't it? Because, you know, at the minute, if this continues, then...
Yeah, I mean, I've spoke about this with Matty, and in terms of just grabbing any sort of positive, and Chris Rigg has been one that we've mentioned, you know, fans just to invest in something like that. You mentioned him earlier, obviously he gave the penalty away, a little bit naive, going to ground in the box like that, but it was born out of frustration, wasn't it? You know, there was sort of nobody else in the team like really taking up, and if it's taking a 16-year-old to try and go and do that, it sort of tells you where you're at. And I think it's really important how he's managed over this next week or so, because obviously that'll be playing on his mind, only his second start, that key moment in the game to go 2-0 down. We've also seen Joe Bellingham coming out on Instagram, making an apology, you know, 18-year-old. Where do you sit with stuff like that? Should that just be kept, you know, you can see that obviously he cares when he does things like that, but, you know, he's 18-year-old. He was obviously at fault for the first goal, but then he makes amends with the second with a wonderful strike. And I know there's been frustration around Job and a lot of talk about how he needs a rest or he's fatigued. I think Mike Dodds has said that his metrics and his numbers in terms of his physical output certainly haven't dipped. But where do you sit with that and players having to come out, especially at that age, thinking that they need to defend themselves? He doesn't have to, because he's having a good season, all like considered his age, and this is only his second season in senior football, really, isn't it?
I think the only thing that fans find hard to stomach, or, you know, I'm putting myself in the position of in that position, is when you see, or when you kind of feel a lack of effort from the side. That's unacceptable. That has absolutely not been the case with Sunderland. And the reality is, with players like Job, 18, Rigg, 16, Mundell, 20, even the likes of Tri Hume, and Leo Hjelde, you know, by in any kind of normal championship team, they're the young players, and yet you look at the likes of Hjelde, Ballard as the real kind of experienced campaigners. Bellingham looks to me like he could do with a bit of a breather. He obviously made the mistake for the first goal. I know he scored that stunner of a second. I thought he struggled on Saturday, but I don't. But Christ, you can excuse like off-colour performances. That doesn't need an apology. I think what it shows, I wouldn't criticise him for that. I think it shows he cares.
I mean, he's still Sunderland's second highest goal scorer this season now. What I say,
and that's the thing. I think when you look at this team, that's the kind of shame, really, as to how this season's turned out. I think this is a team that the fans can relate to and want to relate to, because, you know, like last season, the football Sunderland played at the back end of last season, they were a joy to watch, weren't they? And when you look at the players they've got in the squad now, we've seen what Abdullah Bar's capable of when he's had an on day. We've seen flashes from Mundell. Bellingham does what he does at the weekend. Dan Neil's one of the best midfielders in the division when he's on song. Pierre Ekwa is undoubtedly one of the best midfielders. You could go on and on and on. So many of the players that you look at and think they have the potential of going to play Premier League football, but together, when it's such a young team together, and when there's a lack of clarity from above, and when there's kind of ideas and managers that are coming and going, and it does feel like, if it's felt to us like they've lost all momentum and it's been a bit muddled in recent weeks, then it's going to feel, or recent months, then it's going to feel the same for the players as well, isn't it? And as we've said on numerous occasions, the reality is when you play for Sunderland, there's expectation, and when you play for Sunderland, when you step out for Sunderland at the Stadium of Light this weekend, you're going to have 40,000 fans and you've lost 6 games on the bounce and confidence has taken a hit, but there's expectation. You need to go out and deal with that expectation and win a game. I still think Mowbray said it, Beale said it. I still think Sunderland lack experience. I still think they need 1 or 2 experienced heads, grey hairs, as both of those managers put it, just to nurse the young players through spells like this. Mowbray, sorry, I know I'm going off on one here, but Mowbray talked about it a lot, didn't he? It's not necessarily on the pitch, it's in the dressing room, so they're not listening to me, so they're not listening to a 60-year-old bloke all the time, so they're listening to one of their teammates. I think that's so hugely important. I think it's hugely important at any stage, but even more so when you're in a rut like this, when you've got players who can say, look, I've been here, I had this at X club or Y club, and we'll get out of it. We're not far away. When you've got a teammate saying that rather than a manager, I think it makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. The problem is there's so much then expectation placed on these young players, isn't there? I mean, Dan Ballard was the oldest player in the squad. I go back to when we started the conversation. 20.36, the average age of that side on Saturday. There's just nobody there to pull them along. And then when you lose Ballard, like you said, which is obviously another potentially serious injury hit for them. You know, I think hamstring was mentioned. Tried to run it off, didn't he? But it lasted about 30 seconds and knew he had to come off. It's almost, a bit presumptuous, but it seems to me like he might not be risked. What you almost wonder, would it be worth risking him on Saturday with the international break coming, and maybe just getting to that break and then sort of having a couple of weeks to make sure that both him and Luke O'Nien were back at the same time. On the flip side of that, if he doesn't feature, then you're without Dan Ballard and Luke O'Nien.
And what's your back four then? Probably Hume, Sealt, Yelder, Styles.
Well, finished on Saturday, and the 2 goals that came, both came down Sunderland's left-hand side, where it just totally collapsed and evaporated, didn't it? So, I mean, that is a big problem for Mike Dodds this weekend, isn't it?
And I do wonder with Ballard, but going back to there, Ballard's clearly the type of character who will always try and play through it. But you do wonder whether he knows as well that he's the leader, that they needed him. That Sunderland needed him on that pitch, and whether that was kind of part of the reason why he stepped back on, because it immediately became apparent that he wasn't going to continue. That is a big problem, because I know, QPR are down there, but the no mugs are that they've really picked up since they've changed managers. And
I don't think they've lost away from home since Boxing Day.
Which says everything, and they'll fancy it, won't they? They'll be talking about what we're talking about here if they can get the first goal, if they can get themselves in front. I asked Dodds on Saturday, has the confidence taken a hit, and has your confidence taken a hit? You're a young manager. You've lost 4 games on the bounce. You've tried things; they haven't worked, and predictably said, absolutely mine hasn't. But it's only natural that a young squad, the belief is going to take a hit when you lose 6 games on the bounce.
Like you say, it's not just the squad though. You've got a young sort of inexperienced squad in places. You've got a young inexperienced coach, and realistically, you've got a young inexperienced sort of ownership group as well, haven't you? In terms of what they've done in the game, and obviously Kirill, I think, how old's he? 26, 27. Just throughout the squad, I mean, they've married themselves to this setup and this approach, and when it works, there's a lot to be enamoured by with it. But when you get this moment, and it's the first time that they've hit a moment like this since they've been promoted, and they finding out how tough that this and relentless this division can be, can't they? I mean, I said it to Mike on Friday, regardless of how the Southampton game and this QPR game coming up go, they are desperate for this international break, aren't they? And just a complete reset to try and make something of these last few games after that in the home stretch.
Yeah, and Dodds said that on Saturday. Said it feels like it's an important break. You alluded to kind of the leadership group there. We heard a lot from Speakman in that spell, didn't we? In January when he came in and spoke at a couple of press conferences. I think he could do with speaking now. I think the fans could do with hearing from him now. Really, just to kind of give a feel of what the plan is moving forward, what the feeling is, this season's been a disappointment. A top 6 finish last season, and this season they haven't gone anywhere near to building on that, unless they win the last 10 games, but 9 games. Realistically, that's not going to happen. I think the supporters could do with hearing from Speakman now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, especially if they're sort of winning, the losing streak, continues. Would there be a decision that would have to be made on Mike Dodds at some point if it did continue? Because there is still enough games there for Sunderland to get sucked into the relegation battle, as you said.
Yeah, or I mean, who? What's the plan? What's the plan for a head coach in the summer? Do they know who they want now? Mm-hmm. Is the manager available? Is the head coach available now? Can he be brought in earlier? You've got an international break coming up, or do they not know who they want? I know they're not going to come out and say that, but are they still assessing their options? Do they want to wait until the summer? Do they have confidence? I'm sure they'll say it, and I'm sure they do have confidence that Dodds can get enough results between now and the end of the season to ensure Sunderland don't get sucked in. And I do think there's too many teams below for them to get sucked in. But if they keep losing, they'll get sucked in. They need to get results, and the QPR game feels huge because then you look at the fixtures that come after that. You don't want to be going to Cardiff after the break after 7 straight defeats.